I am Vanessa, 32 years old, and a tech entrepreneur who built my company from nothing but determination and ramen noodles. After selling my startup last year, I quietly purchased a $5 million estate in Vermont that none of my family knows about. I was planning to surprise everyone by hosting Thanksgiving there until I got that text from my mother. "This year, just your sister's family. Keeping it small." I simply replied in joy. They had no idea what I was about to do. Before I dive into the story, let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever felt left out by your own family. Growing up in our middle-class neighborhood in Grand Rapids, Michigan, I always felt like I was living in the shadow of my older sister, Catherine. Our modest 3-bedroom house was covered in trophies and photos celebrating her accomplishments. Catherine was everything my parents dreamed of, and a daughter. She was the homecoming queen captain of the cheerleading squad and maintained a perfect grade point average while seeming effortlessly popular. I, on the other hand, was the odd one out while Catherine was attending football games and going to school dances. I was building computers in my bedroom and coding my first simple programs. My parents never quite understood my interests. When I would try to explain my latest coding project, my father would smile politely before changing the subject to something Catherine had achieved. "Your sister just got accepted to the University of Michigan," my mother would announce at dinner, beaming with pride, "and she and Brad have been dating for 6 months now. I would not be surprised if he proposes after graduation." Meanwhile, my acceptance into a computer science program at Stanford with a partial scholarship barely received acknowledgement. "California is so far away," my mother had said with a frown. "Are you sure you would not rather stay closer to home like your sister?" The pattern of being treated as an afterthought continued throughout my college years. During holiday breaks, conversations revolved around Catherine and Brad's relationship, their wedding plans, and eventually their children. My parents transformed our childhood bedrooms after we moved out. Catherine's became a beautifully decorated guest room that rarely saw use, while mine became storage space filled with Christmas decorations and old furniture. When I would share news about my academic achievements or early career milestones, my parents would listen politely before steering the conversation back to Catherine's growing family. "Did we tell you your nephew Tyler said his first word?" My mother would interject effectively, dismissing whatever I had been talking about. Family gatherings became increasingly difficult to endure. At Catherine's wedding, I was not asked to be a bridesmaid, despite there being 8 in her bridal party, including cousins and friends she had not spoken to in years. At Thanksgiving and Christmas, I was expected to help in the kitchen while Catherine relaxed with the family. When I brought my college boyfriend home one Christmas, my parents barely made an effort to get to know him, while Brad was treated like the son they never had. Even as I began to find success in my career, my family continued to view me as somehow less accomplished than my sister. My father would introduce me as our daughter, who is still figuring things out well into my late 20s, despite the fact that I was working for a major tech company in San Francisco. Catherine, meanwhile, was introduced as our daughter who gave us our beautiful grandchildren and lives just 15 minutes away. The exclusion took different forms over the years. Sometimes it was being seated at the kids' table long after I had graduated college. Other times it was learning about family gatherings after they had already happened. "Oh, we did not think you would want to come all the way from California for just a small birthday dinner," my mother would explain when I would see photos on social media of a celebration I had not been invited to. One particularly painful memory was from 5 years ago when my grandmother fell ill. Catherine was called immediately, but I only found out days later through a cousin. When I confronted my mother about it, she said we did not want to worry you when you were so busy with work. I had flown home immediately, only to be treated like a visitor at the hospital, while Catherine was included in all medical discussions. The constant dismissal of my worth and achievements created deep-seated insecurities that I channeled into my work. If my family would not see my value, I would prove it to myself and the world. I stopped seeking their approval around my 27th birthday after hearing my father tell a family friend that he did not understand what Vanessa actually does for work but Catherine just got promoted at the local bank. It was liberating to release the hope of ever being the favorite or even being seen clearly by my own parents. I focused entirely on building my career and creating my own support network of friends who valued me for exactly who I was. The less I thought my family's approval, the more I thrived professionally and personally. I developed a certain peace with our distant relationship, though the hurt never fully disappeared. I made a point of still showing up for important family events, sending thoughtful gifts for birthdays and anniversaries, and calling regularly to check in. I maintained the relationship out of love and respect, but with the understanding that I would never be central to their lives the way Catherine was. That realization was both painful and freeing. My parents never visited me in California despite my many invitations. They always had a reason why it was not convenient or why I should come to Michigan instead. Meanwhile, they vacationed with Catherine Brad and their children regularly. I saw the photos on social media of their trips to Disney World and summer vacations at Lake Michigan. Over time, I built a life I loved, independent of their validation. I created my own traditions, found a community that appreciated me, and pursued my passions without explanation or apology. The distance that had once felt like rejection became the space I needed to grow into myself fully. Little did my family know that the daughter they had underestimated for years was building something extraordinary. My path to success began in my freshman dorm room at Stanford, while other students were decorating their spaces with posters and fairy lights. I set up a makeshift workstation with a second-hand desk and the computer I had built myself. I was determined to make the most of my education, especially since I was working 3 part-time jobs to supplement my partial scholarship. Mornings started at 5:30 a.m. with my job at the campus coffee shop. Between classes, I tutored high school students in math and computer science. Evenings and weekends were spent answering phones at the university tech support desk. Sleep was a luxury I rarely afforded myself, but I was driven by a vision of what my future could be. My roommate Zoe would often return from parties to find me still awake coding or studying. "You work too hard," she would say, concerned. "College is supposed to be fun too." But for me, every line of code was a step toward independence. Every all-nighter was an investment in never having to rely on my family's approval again. I graduated with honors, having already developed a small app that helped students coordinate study groups. It was nothing revolutionary, but it taught me valuable lessons about user experience and practical application of my skills. My first real venture into entrepreneurship came 2 years after college. I had been working at a mid-sized tech company, learning the industry and saving every penny I could with my savings and a small loan from my former professor who believed in my vision. I launched a startup focused on streamlining communication for remote teams. This was years before remote work became mainstream, and the timing was not right. After 18 months of tireless effort, I had to admit defeat when we ran out of funding. The failure was devastating but educational. I moved into a tiny apartment in San Francisco with 3 roommates to cut costs while I regrouped. We shared a converted living room divided by IKEA bookshelves for privacy, and I slept on a futon that doubled as my couch during the day. My desk was a door balanced on 2 filing cabinets, but it was enough for me to keep working on new ideas. My break came when I landed a position at Tech Forward, one of the fastest growing companies in Silicon Valley. I started in a mid-level development role, but quickly distinguished myself by solving a major security issue that had been plaguing their main platform. Within 2 years, I was leading my own team and had caught the attention of the executive leadership. The experience and connections I gained at Tech Forward were invaluable, but I still had the entrepreneurial itch. I spent my evenings and weekends developing a new software concept focused on artificial intelligence applications for small businesses. This time, I was smarter about market research timing and the specific problem I was trying to solve. When I felt the concept was ready, I took the biggest risk of my career. I left my secure, well-paying job to found Secure Connect, pouring my entire savings into the venture. The first 6 months were terrifying. I moved to an even smaller apartment, ate ramen noodles more often than I care to remember, and worked 16-hour days. There were moments when I questioned my sanity, wondering if I should have stayed in my comfortable job or even chosen a more conventional path like Catherine. The stress took a physical toll. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and battled constant anxiety during one particularly low point. I called my parents seeking some emotional support. My father answered, and after listening to my abbreviated struggles for less than a minute, he said, "Well, this is what happens when you choose such an unusual career." Catherine never has these problems at the bank. That was the last time I shared my professional challenges with my family. Instead, I leaned on my network of friends and mentors in the industry. Zoe, my college roommate who had remained a close friend, let me crash on her couch for a month when I had to give up my apartment temporarily to make payroll for my small team. My former boss at Tech Forward introduced me to potential investors. My Stanford professor reviewed my business plan and offered critical feedback. The breakthrough came when we secured our first round of serious funding. A venture capital firm specializing in AI startups saw the potential in our product and invested $2 million. That investment allowed me to hire key talent, refine our product, and begin serious marketing efforts. We expanded from 3 employees working out of my apartment to 15 people in a real office space. The following years were a roller coaster of challenges and victories. We survived a major market downturn that claimed many similar startups. We pivoted our product focus when we discovered an underserved niche in the industry. We fought off a patent infringement claim from a much larger competitor. Through it all, I led with determination and the resilience I had been building since childhood. 7 years after founding Secure Connect, we had grown to over 100 employees with offices in San Francisco, Austin, and Boston. Our client list included Fortune 500 companies and government agencies. The little girl who had been building computers in her bedroom while her sister went to prom was now running a company valued at over $200 million. When a major tech conglomerate approached us with an acquisition offer last year, the decision was not easy. I had built Secure Connect from nothing, and it felt like my child in many ways. But the offer was too significant to ignore $350 million with the opportunity for me and my team to continue leading the division within their larger corporate structure. After the acquisition, I found myself with more wealth than I had ever imagined possessing. My first indulgent purchase was a beautiful 3-bedroom condo in San Francisco with views of the Golden Gate Bridge. For someone who had spent years in tiny, shared apartments, having a space that was entirely mine felt like an extraordinary luxury. But the purchase that brought me the most joy was finding my estate in Vermont. I had always loved the East Coast. In autumn and during a vacation last fall, I fell in love with a historic property near Manchester. The estate featured a main house with 7 bedrooms, a separate guest house, 50 acres of land with hiking trails, a pond, and stunning mountain views. The moment I walked through the front door, I knew it was special. I purchased the property for $5 million and spent another $1 million renovating and decorating it to perfection. I hired a local estate manager named Thomas to maintain the property when I was not there, which was most of the time given my work schedule, but I visited whenever I could, finding peace in the rolling hills and forests that surrounded my new sanctuary. Throughout all of this success, I had been relatively quiet about my achievements with my family. They knew I had sold my company and done well, but I never shared financial details or the full scope of my success. Part of me was waiting for the right moment to show rather than tell them what I had built. Another part was protecting myself from their potential dismissal of my accomplishments the way they had dismissed me so many times before. I had planned to finally reveal everything by hosting Thanksgiving at my Vermont estate. I imagined their surprise when they arrived at the property, the recognition in their eyes that the daughter they had underestimated had built something extraordinary. I pictured finally earning my father's respect and my mother's pride. Even Catherine might finally see me as an equal rather than the little sister who never quite measured up. It was not about showing off my wealth. but about finally being seen for who I had become, about taking my place in the family as a successful adult in my own right. That was the plan until my mother's text changed everything. The text arrived on a Tuesday morning in early November as I was reviewing quarterly reports in my San Francisco office. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother, and I opened it, expecting the usual check-in about holiday plans. Vanessa, about Thanksgiving. This year, we are keeping it small. Just Catherine, Brad, and the kids. Hope you understand. Maybe we can see you at Christmas instead. I stared at the screen, reading the message multiple times, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less hurtful. There was no explanation, no apology. Just the casual dismissal that had characterized our relationship for years. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard as I contemplated various responses. I could ask for an explanation. I could express my hurt. I could remind her that I had already booked my flight to Michigan. In the end, I simply wrote, "Enjoy." I sent my phone down and tried to refocus on work, but the familiar pain of exclusion washed over me. Despite all my success, despite all I had achieved, I was still the afterthought, the expendable family member who could be uninvited. With a brief text message, my assistant Natalie noticed something was wrong when she brought in my afternoon coffee. "Are you okay? You look like you just got some bad news." I attempted a smile that did not reach my eyes. "Just family stuff. Nothing new. Want to talk about it?" She offered, closing the door to give us privacy. I found myself sharing the text and the history behind it, something I rarely did with colleagues. Natalie listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly indignant on my behalf. "So, you were just going to fly to Michigan for Thanksgiving, even though they treat you this way?" she asked when I finished. "I always do," I admitted. "Every holiday, every year, I show up with gifts and a smile help in the kitchen. Listen to stories about my nephews and Catherine's job and pretend it does not hurt when my parents barely ask about my life. And you were planning to surprise them with the Vermont estate after all that." I nodded, feeling foolish. Now, I guess I still wanted their approval even after all these years of proving I do not need it. Natalie's expression softened. That is understandable, but maybe this is an opportunity to break the pattern. The idea sat with me throughout the day. By evening, as I drove home to my condo, a sense of determination began to replace the hurt I had been accommodating my family's dismissal of me for too long. This year would be different. Once home, I poured a glass of wine and sat on my balcony overlooking the city lights. On impulse, I called my cousin Laura, my mother's sister's daughter, who had always been kind to me despite living on the opposite coast. "Vanessa." "What a nice surprise," Laura answered warmly. "I was just thinking about you. Are you coming to Michigan for Thanksgiving? We would love to see you." "Actually, I was just disinvited," I explained. "Mom texted that they are keeping it small this year, just Catherine's family." A pause. "That is strange. Aunt Judy told my mom the same thing last week. She said they were just having immediate family this year." My curiosity piqued. "So you are not going either?" "No, none of us were invited. Mom was pretty hurt, actually. We have been going to their house for Thanksgiving for 20 years. Further calls to other family members revealed the same pattern. My mother's brother, Uncle Paul, and his family had been told they were taking a break from hosting extended family. My father's sister, Aunt Diane, had been told they were keeping it intimate this year due to some health concerns, though no one was actually ill. In total, more than 20 family members who usually gathered for our traditional Thanksgiving had been excluded. The only ones invited were Catherine, Brad, and their 3 children. The realization made the exclusion both more and less personal. I was not the only one uninvited, but the fact that only my sister's family was welcome still stung. My cousin Jacob, Uncle Paul's son, was particularly vocal about his disappointment. "I had already bought plane tickets," he complained. "Your mom has hosted Thanksgiving for as long as I can remember. What are we all supposed to do now?" As he spoke, an idea began to form in my mind. "What if we still had Thanksgiving together?" I suggested. "Just not at my parents' house." "We're a restaurant," Jacob asked skeptically. Everything will be booked by now. I have a place, I said, making a split-second decision. A house in Vermont with plenty of room for everyone. What if I hosted Thanksgiving this year? There was a pause on the line. You have a house in Vermont. Since when? It is a recent purchase, I explained vaguely. It is beautiful in the fall, and there is more than enough space for all of us. Jacob's enthusiasm was immediate, and over the next hour I made similar calls to other family members. To my surprise and growing excitement, almost everyone was receptive to the idea. My uncles, aunts, and cousins from both sides of the family quickly agreed to come to Vermont instead of Michigan. By midnight, I had created a group text with everyone who had been excluded from my parents' Thanksgiving. I shared photos of the estate for the first time, earning shocked responses and excited messages. "Is this your house?" My cousin Emma texted with multiple exclamation points. "This looks like something out of a magazine," Aunt Diane wrote. "How many bedrooms did you say there were?" Uncle Paul asked practically as the messages poured in. I felt a weight lifting. The rejection that had felt so painful hours earlier was transforming into an opportunity to create something new and meaningful. I was no longer the excluded daughter seeking a place at my parents' table. I was a host, opening my doors to others who had also been left out. The next morning, I expanded my guest list beyond family. I invited Zoe and other friends who had been my support system throughout my career. I included several employees who had mentioned they had no plans for the holiday. I reached out to my neighbors in Vermont whom I had met briefly during my visit. Every acceptance brought a new wave of excitement and purpose. The Thanksgiving I had imagined sharing with my parents and sister was evolving into something potentially more significant, a gathering of people who truly valued each other's company. I called Thomas, my estate manager, to discuss preparations. He was surprised, but delighted by the sudden plans. "How many guests should we expect, Miss Taylor?" "At least 30, possibly more," I replied. "And please, it is just Vanessa." 30 guests, he exclaimed. "We should start preparations immediately. Will you be handling the cooking yourself, or should I arrange for catering?" The question gave me pause. In Michigan, I would have been assigned potato peeling duty in my mother's kitchen, while Catherine relaxed in the living room. Here, I had the opportunity to create an entirely different experience. "Let us hire the best chef available," I decided. "I want this to be special for everyone." As I hung up, I realized I was smiling for the first time since receiving my mother's text. The painful exclusion had created an unexpected opening for joy connection, and perhaps most importantly, the chance to define family on my own terms. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of planning and preparation. I delegated some of my work responsibilities to focus on creating the perfect Thanksgiving gathering. This was more than just a holiday meal. It was a statement about who I had become and what mattered to me now. My guest list grew to 35 people, including family members from both sides who had been excluded from my parents' gathering. I invited cousins I had not seen in years but had once been close with as a child. I included my Uncle Robert, my father's brother who had fallen out of favor with my parents after his divorce, but who had always been kind to me. I reached out to my grandmother Eleanor, my father's mother, though I assumed she would be at my parents' Thanksgiving since she lived with them part-time, beyond family. I invited friends who had become my chosen family over the years. Zoe was flying in from Seattle with her husband. 3 of my earliest employees who had been with Secure Connect from the struggling startup days confirmed they would come. I even invited my former professor from Stanford who had given me that first loan to start my business. Each invitation included flight information with first-class tickets for those traveling from a distance. I arranged for luxury car services to transport everyone from the airport to the estate for guests who preferred to drive. I provided detailed directions and suggestions for scenic routes through the Vermont countryside, with Thomas managing the local arrangements. We secured the services of Chef Antoine, who had worked at a Michelin-starred restaurant in New York before opening his own catering business in Vermont. When I explained what I was trying to create a warm, inclusive gathering that honored both tradition and new beginnings, He immediately understood the vision. "We will create a menu that respects the classic Thanksgiving dishes but elevates them," he explained during our planning call. "And perhaps some unexpected additions to represent the unique journey that brought everyone together." I gave him complete creative freedom, asking only that he include my grandmother's sweet potato recipe if she decided to attend. It was the one dish from family Thanksgivings that held purely happy memories for me. The guest accommodations required careful thought. The main house had 7 bedrooms each with its own bathroom. The separate guest house offered 3 additional bedrooms. For the remaining guests, I reserved rooms at a luxury inn 5 minutes away. I wanted everyone to have their own space and privacy while still feeling part of the gathering. I worked with a local interior designer to prepare each guest room with personalized touches for Zoe. I included photos from our college days and her favorite scented candles for my cousins with children. I added baskets of age-appropriate toys and books for my uncles who enjoyed whiskey. I placed small selections of local Vermont spirits on their nightstands. The common areas of the house were transformed with tasteful Thanksgiving decorations. I avoided the kitschy pilgrim figurines my mother always displayed, and instead opted for natural elements like gourds, pine cones, and autumn leaves artfully arranged throughout the house. A local florist created stunning arrangements featuring seasonal blooms in rich oranges, deep reds, and warm yellows. I spent hours on the phone with Thomas discussing every detail from the placement of extra seating in the great room to the selection of background music for different parts of the day. We planned activities for various age groups, including a kids' craft table yard games if the weather permitted, and guided hikes on the property. Trails. The media room is stocked with films for the traditional post-turkey nap time. Thomas assured me, and I have arranged for a local musician to provide acoustic guitar music during cocktail hour. Shopping for gifts became another focus. I wanted each guest to have something meaningful to take home, not just as a reminder of the gathering, but as an expression of genuine appreciation for their presence in my life. For my cousins, I found beautiful leather-bound journals with their initials embossed on the covers. For the children, I commissioned custom stuffed animals from a Vermont artisan for my friends and former colleagues. I selected books that held special significance to our shared history. As the RSV continued to arrive, all confirming attendance, I felt a growing sense of anticipation. This gathering was taking on a significance beyond what I had initially imagined. It was becoming a powerful reclamation of the holiday and what family could mean. I scheduled video calls with Thomas 3 times a week to check on progress. During one such call, he gave me a virtual tour of the estate's transformation. The dining room now featured 2 extended tables that could comfortably seat everyone together. The great room had been rearranged to create conversation areas while maintaining an open flow. The kitchen had been stocked with top-of-the-line equipment for Chef Antoine. We have also prepared the outdoor spaces, Thomas explained, panning the camera to show the stone patio where heaters had been installed to combat the November chill. The fire pit is ready for evening gatherings, and we have plenty of blankets for guests who want to enjoy the stars. I had hired a professional photographer to document the celebration, wanting to capture not just the beautiful setting, but the genuine connections between guests. There would be formal group photos, of course, but I was more interested in the candid moments of joy and reunion. 1 week before Thanksgiving, I flew to Vermont to oversee the final preparations. Seeing the estate in person, now fully prepared for guests, was breathtaking. Thomas had executed every detail perfectly, from the welcome baskets in each room to the subtle lighting that made the historic home feel warm and inviting. I walked through each space, imagining my family and friends filling the rooms with conversation and laughter. In the dining room, I ran my hand along the antique table where we would all gather. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, thinking about my parents and sister celebrating separately, unaware of what they were missing. But the feeling quickly passed, replaced by excitement for the new tradition I was creating. The night before guests were to arrive, I stood on the back porch looking out at the moonlit mountains. Chef Antoine and his team were already working in the kitchen, preparing items that could be made ahead. The house smelled of baking bread and simmering stalks. Thomas joined me on the porch, handing me a mug of hot cider. "Everything is ready, Vanessa. It is going to be wonderful." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of emotions. I never thought I would be doing this, hosting my own Thanksgiving separate from my parents. "Family is what we make it," he said wisely. "Sometimes the family we choose is as important as the family we are born into." As I sipped my cider and looked out at the property that was now mine, I realized how true that was. Tomorrow, I would welcome people who truly wanted to be here, who valued me for exactly who I was. The little girl who had never quite fit in was now creating a space where everyone would belong. Thanksgiving morning dawned with a light dusting of snow that made the estate look like something from a holiday card. I was up before sunrise, too excited to sleep, watching as the first golden light touched the distant mountains. In a few hours, my guests would begin arriving, and the house would transform from a beautiful but quiet space to a home filled with life and connection. The first to arrive were my Uncle Robert and his new wife Susan, pulling up in their car just before 10:00. I met them at the front door where Thomas stood ready to take their luggage. "Vanessa," Uncle Robert embraced me warmly. "This place is absolutely incredible." As I showed them around the main floor of the house, I watched their expressions of amazement with a sense of quiet pride. "Your rooms are upstairs. The blue suite at the end of the hall," I explained. "I thought you might enjoy the mountain view." "You own all of this?" Susan asked, gesturing to the expansive property visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I do," I confirmed simply. "It has been a good few years." By 11:30, cars and shuttle vans were arriving regularly. Each new group of guests entered with exclamations of surprise and delight as they took in the estate. My cousins, Jacob and Emma, who remembered me as the quiet girl tinkering with computers at family gatherings, were particularly stunned when you said you had a place in Vermont. "I pictured a cabin or something," Jacob admitted as I showed him the media room with its state-of-the-art projection system. "This is unbelievable, Vanessa." Emma embraced me tightly. "I always knew you would do amazing things," she whispered. "I am so proud of you." Her words touched me deeply. Here was the recognition and pride I had sought from my parents for so many years, offered freely by a cousin who had actually been paying attention to my journey. Zoe and her husband arrived from Seattle, bearing gifts of Washington wines and handmade chocolates. "This exceeds even your usual overachievement," she teased, as she took in the grand staircase and crystal chandelier in the entryway. "Remember when we shared that tiny apartment with the bathroom door that never closed properly?" We laughed together at the memory, marveling at how far we had both come from those struggling early days in San Francisco. The reunion of family members who had not seen each other in years created a joyful buzz throughout the house. Cousins who had grown up together but drifted apart as adults reconnected as if no time had passed. Aunt Diane and Uncle Paul, who had been avoiding each other since a disagreement at a family wedding 3 years ago, were spotted chatting amicably in the library. Children raced through the hallways on a scavenger hunt. Thomas had organized to keep them entertained. The sounds of their laughter mixed with conversations and background music to create the soundtrack of a truly happy gathering. Chef Antoine and his team worked their magic in the kitchen, occasionally emerging to pass appetizers that were received with appreciative murmurs. The aroma of roasting turkey, fresh herbs, and baking pies filled the air, making the house feel even more welcoming. At 2:00, with most guests having arrived and settled in, I invited everyone to the great room for a welcome toast. Standing before the massive stone fireplace, glass of champagne in hand, I looked out at the faces of people who had shaped my life in different ways. "Thank you all for coming today." I began, my voice steady despite the emotion I felt. "Some of us have known each other our whole lives. Others are newer friends who have become family in different ways. What matters is that everyone here today has chosen to be present to create something meaningful together." I did not mention my parents or the circumstances that had led to this alternative gathering. Instead, I focused on gratitude and new beginnings. Today is about appreciation for the connections we share and the new traditions we are creating together. I am honored to welcome you all to my home. As glasses were raised in response, the front door opened unexpectedly. Thomas hurried to see who the late arrival might be and returned moments later with an expression of surprise. "Miss Taylor, your grandmother is here." A hush fell over the room as my grandmother Eleanor entered, assisted by her part-time caregiver, Maria. At 87, she moved slowly but with the same dignity and grace that had always characterized her. I set down my glass and crossed the room to embrace her grandma. "I did not think you would be able to come." I helped her to a comfortable seat near the fire. She patted my hand affectionately. "Did you think I would miss my favorite granddaughter's first time hosting Thanksgiving? When I heard what you were doing, I told your father I had a headache and needed to stay home. Then Maria helped me arrange transportation." Her eyes twinkled mischievously. "Sometimes at my age, you have to be a little sneaky to do what you want." The gathering continued with renewed energy after my grandmother's arrival. She held court in the great room, sharing family stories many had never heard before. Several of my cousins sat at her feet like children at story time, despite being in their 30s and 40s. At 400, Thomas announced that dinner was ready. We moved to the dining room where the tables had been set with fine china crystal and silver. Place cards at every seat, candles and flowers down both tables, elegant, warm, easy. Chef Antoine introduced each course a turkey, brined 3 days stuffing with foraged Vermont mushrooms, cranberry sauce from our own bog. He made Grandma's sweet potatoes to her exact recipe and waited for her nod. Her smile was my favorite moment. Conversation flowed, no hierarchy, no comparisons, just people valued equally. At dusk, we moved to the patio heaters and a fire pit, keeping us cozy. The photographer caught blankets, hot cider, and whiskey faces lit by flames. My former professor toasted me for always seeing possibility. We shared what we were grateful for. Grandma looked at me. "For brave people who make their own path," she said. Later on a window seat, she whispered, "I'm proud of the life you built." Guests posted photos all day. I knew my parents would see. That night, I scrolled through joy-filled images, then read a text from Catherine Niecehouse. "Didn't know you were so loaded. Mom and Dad are freaking out." I turned off my phone and slept. Morning brought a flood of calls and texts. I set the phone aside. This weekend was for new traditions. Some guests left, others stayed. Grandma announced she'd remain as long as you'll have me. By afternoon, the missed calls had piled up, so I slipped to the library. Mom demanded answers. Dad sounded wounded. Catherine accused me of showing off. I called back. "I hosted at my home because you invited only Catherine's family," I said. Questions about money followed. "I sold my company for $350 million. I told you no one listened." Catherine burst in on speaker. Grandma walked in on my end. Her voice was iron. "You excluded Vanessa. She built something beautiful anyway. Love is attention and a seat at your table. By that measure, you've failed her." Silence. That night came softer messages, Catherine's apology, Dad's pride, Mom's wish to visit. Weeks later, they came for Christmas. We talked honestly, walked snowy trails, exchanged thoughtful gifts. As the year ended, I understood belonging isn't waiting for a place at someone else's table, it's building your own, and welcoming those who truly want to be there.